All right, just to warm-up exercise for the camera, what is your background and your area of expertise?
I actually have no background. I'm all foreground. No, my background is in design, and my area of expertise really is in applying design culture to and design practices to changing culture.
How did you get to this place?
Well, early on in my work, I encountered a conflict between the amount of energy I was putting into that work and the effects of it. And I began to think that in a very selfish and pretty straightforward way, that I wanted my energy to go into positive change. And so I started a little company called Public Good. And the idea was simply to use design methods and design ideas to make public good, things that we thought were in the public interest. And when I started the studio I have now, Bruce Mount Design, 20 years ago, I took that idea with me, and that's still the basis of what we do.
In terms of design, what we're interested in understanding from you is how has our effort to survive informed design in the past? So just before the Industrial Revolution, what were our design tenets? Because right now we're not at the survival level. How did we inform our design a long time ago?
Well, for most of our history, our design was, our design skills and our approach to design was fairly basic in the sense that it was about amplifying our capacities, but our ability to do that was pretty modest. And so, we used those capacities to build surplus where we could, and to ensure our survival in the long run, and very much to defend ourselves and our community against the outside world and against one another. And that was really the way that we use design. In recent times, that's changed quite dramatically.
So how has it changed, and what are the forces that have changed design?
Well, I think that with the coming of an industrial culture, things changed dramatically because suddenly the amplification was multiplied tremendously. So our ability to affect the landscape around us in every dimension was amplified in an enormous way. Our ability, when we began to make machines that could change the world, we could amplify our intentions. And we began to change the landscape in dramatic ways. At the same time, we saw an explosion in our capacity to control nature, and therefore in our longevity and our ability to populate the world. So in the course of about 150 years, you have almost a six-fold increase in quantity combined with a staggering increase in the capacity to shape the landscape.
So we're not just going like the Bauhaus was really function first, form later. And was that true, and then do we now? Are we? Is design? Are we looking? Are we excessive in the way we design? Are we careful? Are we efficient now? Or because there are no pressures to be efficient?
Well,
that's a lot in one.
Yeah, but I can tell where you're going. Here's what happens in the kind of sequence. We begin in the in most of our history with a more or less holistic intersection with the world. So we think and design and experience reality comprehensively and holistically, and that's the sort of enveloping world that we live in. With the coming of the Industrial Revolution, a new idea enters our consciousness of cutting things into pieces. This idea of abstraction, and along with Ford and Taylor, people like that, we begin to look at the world in fragments and elements and pieces and to optimize each piece. This concept removes us from a real enveloping, holistic understanding of the natural world, and we begin our journey on the amplification of expertise, the magnification of force. We begin to shape the world more radically, and that idea that you can cut things into pieces and optimize them becomes the dominant cultural image of the 20th century. What happens in recent years is that we push through that to a new kind of holistic thinking, where we begin to put those pieces back together again and reconstitute a holistic vision of ourselves and our lives in a natural context.
Right. That's right. In our design evolution, assumptions need to be changing
Mm-hmm.
based on post-industrial separation, like you were saying.
Uh-huh.
How and is this a good segue to sustainability and what it means? So
Uh-huh.
what are the principles of design that is sustainable or that takes into account the whole?
Well, I think if you look at it historically, our culture evolved our culture evolved with an image of limitless resources. In other words, we had really no limit for most of our history, simply because there were so few of us, and combined with a very limited capacity to affect the world. What happens in the last 150 years is that we explode in quantity and in capacity. So suddenly we have to begin to understand a new image of resources that have boundaries, and a new image of our responsibility in affecting change and in affecting the impact with the capacities that we've evolved. I just want to add two things to that. I would say the new sensibility of design has two fundamental ideas that are the foundation, and that is the long term. So the first is to simply understand that the things that we are doing are not about the current situation. They're about the coming generations and the impact and the residue and the kind of ripple effect of everything that we do. And the second is that is sustainability. The second is really understanding that everything we do must be conceived in an endless cycle, that there is no exterior to the way that we work. When we think of throwing something away, we think of throwing it outside of where we are. Well, there actually is no outside. There's only an interior in this new way of thinking.
That's beautiful. That's really great.
Yep.
Was there another point you wanted to make under that?
Nope. That's it. Can you tell us what an intelligent city or community may look like, or what design principles they're operating under? Well, the interesting thing about sustainable design is that I don't think it has to look in any particular way. I think that the new design, one of the things that we really discovered in the last few years is that the new design is actually invisible. The new design is not about a visual boundary. The form, in fact, could be anything. It's the structure and internal logic and intelligence and the performance that has to be designed. And if you think about it urbanistically, we can understand that there are certain kinds of urban behavior that are simply so much more ecologically intelligent. And I guess the kind of simple answer is that density is the key. The more compact we are, the more nature we have around us to sustain our living. So, however that may look, there are a lot of ways that it may look, but structurally it will be it will be density that is important.
And because this new design is invisible, then we don't have to argue between deprivation and abundance and design that works for the long term.
I think that for me there's a very interesting discourse and discussion going on right now about how we get out of here, because I think that a lot of people know that we can't be here in the long run. In other words, we met a man named E.O. Wilson who said that if all the world lived like Americans, we would need 4 planet Earths to sustain that practice. Well, it's clear that that's not a plausible option. There's no way we can do that. And we know that in the future, we won't live like Americans. Probably Americans won't live like Americans. But there are sort of 2 ways out of here. One is backwards, and so there's a big group of people who would like to somehow get our culture into reverse and back out of here. And their idea is to be disciplinary, to restrict our behaviors, to confine us, and to work backwards and see if we can't get back to what we were, say, a century and a half ago. That has pretty drastic ramifications, and we have generations of proof that it doesn't really work. That, on the contrary, people embrace possibility. They embrace new developments. They embrace new possibilities. They embrace new ways of doing things. So there's another group of people who believes in a forward possibility, that you can actually get to a new place forward, which is about understanding the things that we love to do, understanding what delights us, what brings us pleasure and joy and possibility, and designing those things in the most intelligent, sustainable, long-term way, to understand how we can do the things that we love, like driving a car, for instance, but do it in a way that we can all do it, and do it in a way that we can all do it forever. And there are ways of doing that. I mean, one of the extraordinary realizations of this historical time is that we have these possibilities around us and in front of us. We need only really to capture them.
Great. Why do you think we have a hard time capturing those opportunities that would serve us best?
Well, there are a lot of reasons that is slow in happening. But at the same time, we have to say that it's absolutely extraordinary how quickly it is happening. I mean, I think we mostly fail to understand how quickly we're changing. When we did a project called Massive Change, and when we talk about that project, when I present that project, the most common question is when can we do this? How quickly can we get it? And I have to answer that, well, we are already doing this, and this is already happening. The human species has an extraordinary capacity to naturalize new things. So we think of a cell phone today as nature. And a few years ago, you had to connect to a piece of wire, from here to Tokyo to talk to somebody in Tokyo. And today that connection around the world happens in a totally different and fluid way. So we are actually making these things happen. They're happening in a dramatic and pretty extraordinary way. But there's still many things that are slowing them or stopping them. One is what we call in software an installed base. In other words, there are currently millions of gas stations around the world. Well, that's an installed base of servicing automobiles. If you suddenly wanted to use a different fuel, you have to deal with the fact that you have gas stations all over the world. And those will have to be, each one will need to be converted, etc. So there's an installed base. There's, secondly, fear. We have grown comfortable with the way that we do it today, even if we didn't do it this way 2 or 3 years ago. So suddenly it seems natural and we're comfortable with it. And so that's also that fear of change is there. Thirdly, there is commercial interest. There are people in every situation who profit and benefit either socially or economically from the existing situation. So a new solution may be a beautiful technological or design solution, but it's got to overcome the resistance of those 3 factors to really make the dramatic change.
All right. Can I ask you, can you just, for the camera, describe your project?
Oh, sure. About 3.5 years ago, we started a project called Massive Change, and it was really a project to try to understand how the world is evolving and what role design is playing in that evolution. We did 3 years of research on how people are connecting all over the world to solve the problems that we're facing today, and how we are developing a global culture of design in almost every field to address and overcome the challenges that we're facing. We began with the premise that contrary to a kind of negative mood that was floating around, that in fact people all over the world were working together to solve problems. And we were surprised that in the design field itself there was a very negative mood, and designers and architects would talk about the fact that they were powerless and unable to affect change, when in fact we have to acknowledge that historically we're simply the most educated, richest, most connected, most collective and collaborative generation, and wealthiest that the world has ever created. And therefore, it seemed totally at odds with this kind of pessimistic and cynical mood. And for me, design is a practice that has an obligation to solution. We don't have the luxury of cynicism. As a designer, I need a critical method, but I need a positive outcome. I can't have throwing a stone as the outcome of my work. The outcome of my work must be a new way of doing something. It must be a solution. And so when I began to see this in design culture, that designers were thinking this way, it seemed to me a really interesting kind of conflict. And that got under my skin, and we began to research this idea and this problem. And what we saw was that, in fact, people the world over are working together in new ways to solve problems, some of which have vexed us for centuries and even from the beginning of time. And they are solving those problems. And we're building the capacity to do the things we need to do to affect change in a positive way. Well, in Massive Change, we were very deliberate in Massive Change not to include our own work. So it's a project about the world of design that we were researching, and we didn't include our own projects. So I think there are sort of 2 answers to that.
Do both.
So okay. Okay. So what I'm gonna go through the Toynbee thing, and then I'll do examples. Okay. In our research for Massive Change, we found an extraordinary lecture by a former Prime Minister of Canada named Lester B. Pearson, who won the Nobel Prize in '57. And in that lecture, in his Nobel lecture, he talks about how the world is really coming together into one global culture for the first time. That even though we'd had globalized trade and exchanges and and especially conflict and war, that our cultures had principally evolved as a kind of island ecologies, and that they had an internal logic and very little real interaction with the outside world. And he said, in 57, that in fact the great opportunity of the coming century would be to work in the field that was about this new kind of together culture, that people were suddenly collaborating. And in his lecture, he quotes a man named Arnold Toynbee, and Toynbee says the 20th century in the long sweep of history, and he was a British historian, in the long sweep of history, it's not going to be about either technical invention or political conflict, that conflict and invention won't be the dominant themes historically in the long term. And this was 1957, so these two men would have experienced the worst the worst of the century in the Second World War. But still, they say, no, it's not going to be about that. It's going to be about the ability, the ability to dare to imagine the welfare of the entire human race as a practical objective. And when he uses the term practical objective, he makes it a design project, because that's what a practical objective is. It's a design problem. And so when I read that, I thought that's what massive change is really about. That's the pattern that we've been seeing in the world. That's what people are doing all over the world. They're collaborating on these new solutions. And so we set out to understand whether or not it's true. It's now almost 50 years later. Was Toynbee right, or maybe the cynics and the pessimists are right and we're wrong? What we found, in fact, is that Toynbee is massively right. And what was very exciting for us was that there's a mountain of evidence to prove that he is, and it's not confined to a particular demographic or a particular country or region. It's really global. And that a new generation of designers and citizens looks at that quotation and says, it's not going far enough. It's not big enough, which to me was really striking, because I thought this is the biggest, most ambitious idea I've ever heard. But the new designers today say that's not enough. Take out all of mankind and put in all of life. Our project today for a new generation of designers is the welfare of all of life as a practical objective. It goes beyond ourselves to include the entire ecological realm. That all of life is actually a design project today, that we have to design the capacity to sustain it in the long run. And that's really what we found in Massive Change. In terms of examples, we looked at, what we did was we turned the telescope around from the way that most designers look at design, and we said, let's look at it from the citizen's perspective. So as a citizen, what regions of my life are being transformed by these new capacities? What regions are being invented, like the economy of the image, or the information economy, and what regions are being transformed, like the economy of energy or the economy of movement. And what we saw was really striking, was that in each of these areas, it's almost as if we had distributed an ambition without ever having written it down. So that people all over the world knew what they ought to be working on, and were working on it in their own way, knowing that they only had one sort of pixel in this incredible mosaic of an image of the future, and that they could contribute that pixel to that mosaic, knowing that in the end, that incredibly beautiful image was a sustainable future. So we saw people, for instance, in the economy of movement. What was really striking was that everyone all over the world knows what we have to do, and they're working on it in every different way, and that is to produce sustainable mobility. And they're working on it in India, and they're working on it in Brazil, and in America, and in Europe, and in every way. even if you talk to the people that you would think would be the last people to support it, the people who will be the last guy standing selling an SUV, they know that ultimately that's where we're going. And they may profit from being the last person selling an SUV. There's money to be made being that last guy doing that. But they know that in the end, what we are going to produce is a new model of movement. And what we can see, if you take an example like what Dean Kamen is doing, we know that we can produce that movement at a much reduced cost, using far fewer resources, providing an even more delightful experience, and still service the requirement that we need for moving around. What we saw, one of the things that we looked at through the whole project was the impact of previous design development. So if you take the car as an example, it's one of the best to think about in terms of the success of design and the impact that might have. The car is probably the single most successful design ever created. No other design has been so thoroughly embraced by every possible culture. So cultures may have absolutely no interest in our secular democracy, but they have embraced traffic. They've taken the idea of the car into their own, and even places that don't have it in a big way are desperate to get it. So we can see that the idea of the car, the idea of an individual or a group of individuals moving freely, is one of the dominant, extraordinary ideas of the 20th century, and it is embraced universally. The solution is simply not to wag our fingers and hope that people will get out of the car. The solution, because we have generations of proof that it doesn't work, the solution is to actually design a new way of doing it, and to reconceive the way that we deliver that delightful experience. But to somehow imagine that we can erase a delightful experience from our world is simply not, it seems, not a plausible option. That ultimately we can design it in a different way, and we can do that delightful thing without having the long-term impact, without having the cost, without using the resources that we're currently using. If you look at the history of design, what you see is that for most of that history, it was based on form applied to natural substance. So we found things in the world, and then we shaped them. And the shaping of that material was our understanding of design. So if you look at an object like this, you say, well, the shape of this bottle is the design of this bottle. But in fact, what we understand today is that it's no longer about this kind of singular conception of a discrete object that is separate from the world. That's the kind of old-fashioned idea of design. The reality of this object is this material came from somewhere. So somewhere upstream, you have the flow of matter. At some point, energy and intelligence intersect with that matter. They give it this shape. That shape provides a utility over a certain time period, in this case, a relatively short time period, to get this water to me. When I'm finished with that water, that object then is discarded, and in being discarded, it takes its place back into the stream of matter that starts again at the beginning, and at some point, the material that makes up this object becomes an object again when it encounters once again force and intelligence. So you can see that it's an endless cycle of matter that intersects at some point with intelligence and force. Now that's a conception of design that is in a holistic intersection with the reality of the world around it. and this kind of singular, discrete object is no longer plausible. In the same way, the idea of design as a singular practice is really coming to an end. The idea that you can have, that it's about, it's not that you can't have it, you still have, sort of signature practices, but ultimately those are more and more about complex networks of association that bring together collaborative processes and expertise and capacity, more and more from all over the world, in this distributed problem-solving model. So that we can, when we come to solve a problem, we might reach into India, and we might reach into America, and we might reach into Europe, or Asia, or wherever we need to find the ideas, the resources, the expertise that we need for a particular solution. And that new kind of distributed collaborative process makes for a very different kind of design culture. And that is really what massive change is all about. Yeah. There are a couple of things that I would point out in that we found in massive change that would be fun.
Okay, good.
One of the projects that we saw in the energy economy was really a kind of archetype of this new model. And it's a project by Dean Kamen called Project Slingshot. And the idea is it's the new model in the sense that he uses an output as an input. And I'll explain. He wants to make electricity out of biomass fuel. So he says, I want to make a device that will take biomass fuel anywhere in the world of whatever type, so I can't be specific, but anything that will produce heat, I want to turn that heat into electricity so that I can access anywhere in the world all the benefits of global knowledge. So he says, I can produce energy, I can take heat, I can turn it into electricity, but I'm pretty inefficient. I can only capture about 25 to maybe 30% of that energy as electricity. In the past model of design and in the past way of thinking, we would have just discarded that other 75 to 80% of the energy, because we would have a single focus on a single problem, and we would say, let's take that energy, make it electricity. What we can't make electricity, we call that waste. In the new thinking about design, in a sustainable world, there is no waste. There is no, if you look at the forest floor, there is no waste on the forest floor. Everything that falls there takes its place in the cycle. So he says, I'm going to take this energy that I'm throwing away, and since I get it for free, I can use it for something else. So I'm going to use it to clean water. So he uses that output as an input to create clean water. He makes a device where you can take polluted water, use this energy, and create clean water with it. Now he has a device that solves two problems. It takes biomass fuel and polluted water, and with that produces electricity and clean water, or knowledge and health, off the grid, without having to run a cable across the continent. You can take this device, put it down anywhere, and it will have that effect in that local context. And that's really the new design model.
That's, yeah. I love that.
It's an incredible
I'm so
project.
happy I've heard of it, and I'm
It's an
so
incredible
happy that
project.
you brought that up. Incredible. Oh yeah, definitely.
So our projects, let me just think. Our projects, we have a design company, design studio based in Canada. And there are a few projects that, for me, have been really instrumental in our development and our thinking. One is, of course, Massive Change, because it's a project where we spent a few years researching the leading thinkers in the world of design. And now we have this extraordinary network of people around the world to collaborate with and to call on for expertise on other projects. So it's had a profound effect, both on our capacity and really on setting an agenda for us. It's really set the agenda for our studio for the next decade. That massive change is really what we're working on. Some of the other projects, we did a project in Panama, which is a museum of biodiversity that we developed from scratch in collaboration with an architect named Frank Gehry. And in that case, we really started from the mandate of the institution to educate, to network, and to declare. That ultimately, if you don't make a declaration of biodiversity as an important idea, then we'll never understand just how significant it is. So that's been an extraordinary project for us. We're working on a project called Riversphere, which is in New Orleans with Tulane University. It's a center for the culture and science of the Mississippi River. And since the events of Katrina, even more pressing in trying to understand the science and ecology of such a place. Let's see other ones I thought of. There are two other ones. One is a project called Downsview, and Downsview is a 600-acre development in Toronto. And in that project, we're really trying to put an end to the idea of park. The idea of the park came from a world where we behaved badly, and so we needed to do something to demonstrate that we were actually okay as a society. And so we preserved pieces. And what we're trying to do is actually invert that diagram so that we mostly behave intelligently, so that in the future we may have parks of stupid behavior, that we would have small places where we behave stupidly, rather than large places with small parks of intelligent behavior. So Downsview is really an effort to articulate a way of living urbanistically, a way of living in a city that integrates natural and cultural development in a seamless way, where there isn't a kind of boundary between the two. And the last project, I guess, is that we're working on right now is a project in Guatemala called Guatemala. And it's a project to change the culture in Guatemala from a culture of death to a culture of life. It's really a radically ambitious, long-term challenge to bring ecological, social, and economic sustainability to that part of the world.
I love the parks of stupidity.
Yeah, that's what we need to do, huh? It's amazing, the diagram. When you look at a diagram, if you look at a diagram of North America with all the parks, right? It looks like a big area with a lot of tiny dots of intelligence in a field of stupidity. Right. And really, the idea is to invert the diagram and say, look, let's have a field of intelligence with some pinpricks of stupidity.
Fantastic. I love it. Do you have that image?
Yeah, sure.
Because we're going to call on you for
okay.
a few of
sure.
these, because we're going to illustrate.
Okay, so let's begin first by defining what the bottleneck is. E.O. Wilson describes it quite beautifully in his, I think it's in his book called The Future of Life. And the idea is simply that what's so exciting, let's say, about his idea of the bottleneck is that it gives us a possibility for success, in that he says we don't have a problem forever. We have a problem for the next 50 years, in his mind. And what he's talking about is we are now at I guess around 6.5 billion. The projection is that we'll go to about 9 billion by 2050. So we have an additional 3 billion or so added in this half of the century. where upon things begin to peak out and we start to see a decline in population. This is what the projections suggest. Now, that means that once we start to pull down the total, we begin to lessen our impact on the environment in a very basic way of, the more people there are, the more food we need, the more energy we use, the more impact we have in a very physical way. So there's that kind of image of the next 50 years being, a hill that we have to get over, that kind of constraint being what we have to get through is really coming from E.O. Wilson. And what's causing that, let's say, aside from the sheer physical presence, on the one hand, it's really a sort of intersection of sheer quantity on the one hand. So you have 9 billion people, and combining that with new technologies and their distribution. So you have 9 billion people who all want an automobile. It's an absolutely staggering situation. So that's really the intersection that we have to manage and redesign. We have to understand how we can produce a delightful quality of life for more and more people without the consequence of destroying the environment that supports and provides that delightful quality of life. So that's really the design problem that we face as a global generation. Okay.
So what are the consequences of this if we do not design our way out of this? What do you think? And do you think are you optimistic?
Well, based on our research, I am extremely optimistic in the sense that that we are developing capacities to affect change in a very positive way. Now, if we don't, and there are good reasons why we wouldn't, greed, conflict, war. There are a lot of reasons that, and we have a pretty powerful negative track record on these issues. So there are reasons why we wouldn't. But provided that we can organize ourselves, that we can understand our collective well-being, that we can, in fact, collaborate and produce the effects that we need to, the capacities are there, and the ability to solve these problems, I think, is there. The ramifications, if we don't solve them, are pretty drastic dislocations. If we fail in solving these problems in the coming half century, we could imagine a world of 1 billion people again, in a very nasty set of circumstances that would take us to that. So, and there's no guarantee that that's not going to happen. But I think that given what's happening right now and our ability to affect change, and I would say our global orientation to change, in other words, we have built a culture worldwide of change. I think we've mostly failed to understand and see that. But every morning, people who run organizations, businesses, and even governments wake up and say, there's a better way to do this. And they exist to change things. There's almost no organization that exists to maintain the status quo. Almost every, certainly every business and almost every organization, with rare exception, we have archival organizations. We have organizations that are really designed to maintain culture. But almost every other organization wakes up in the morning and says, how can we do this better? So we have built globally an extraordinary culture of change and growth, and that culture has produced more wealth in every definable category in more places, more distributed than at any other time in human history. So if ever we stood a chance to grapple with and overcome the challenges that we face, now's the time.
Nice.
Because what I was thinking about was, if we don't have massive negative dislocation, in other words, if we don't have disaster and crisis on a global scale that would drag us back into pre-industrial life, what does positive massive change look like? I think that it has some characteristics. One is I think it has freedom at its core. E.O. Wilson once said that if you want to do something for the environment, liberate women. That wherever we liberate women, we see where women have the freedom to control their lives. We see the population increase slowing and declining. So that I think has a powerful that will be a powerful aspect of a global future. That in fact, in order to have a sustainable future, we need freedom. I think that another aspect of that future is pleasure. The idea that somehow a sustainable future is going to be about pain is not plausible. So positive massive change designs delight into our daily lives and incorporates delight in a sustainable way. I think that this kind of culture where pleasure and delight is seen as decadent and has a negative implication, fails to understand the psychology of people everywhere. That in the end, we embrace delight and we embrace pleasure. So it would have to be a kind of central idea. And third, I think it would have to be another central aspect of it would be growth. That ultimately, not growth in numbers or growth in population or growth in in square footage, but growth in knowledge, in societal wealth. That what we saw in massive change was that what we're really doing right now is redesigning wealth. We still think of wealth as very limited. And we speak of wealth as capital, and that's the kind of extent of our imagination. But if you look to people like Hernando de Soto or Hazel Henderson, they're looking at wealth in new ways and saying, in fact, we're designing, we have to design our understanding of wealth in a more diverse way to include a wealth of knowledge, a wealth of access, a wealth of literacy, a wealth of connectedness, a wealth of mobility. All these new kinds of wealth are really what we need to focus on, and that will be part of a solution of a sustainable global ecology.
That's great. Yay. We're all
Okay. Yeah, I mean, the idea. That's the idea that you're, sometimes people ask me about the gap the growing gap between rich and poor. And my answer is that I don't care. I'm not interested in the gap between rich and poor because structurally that's what capitalism produces. In other words, today I got a little bit richer and Bill Gates got a lot richer. And the gap between he and I got bigger. What I am interested in instead is actually, where's the bottom? How can we move the bottom up? How can we produce more and more effect in an equitable, social, ecological way for more and more people? And we want more and more wealthy people. We don't want fewer of them. It sounds counterintuitive, but it actually makes a lot of sense to have more wealthy people, not fewer. And what's number 7 again?
And number 7 is the...
Can I choose?
Yeah, I know. You can. Absolutely can. Number 8.
What's number 8? I don't think I got to number 8.
Oh.
For me, there's something that's shaping up, and we saw evidence of it in massive change from all over the world, that there is a world that is coming together as an image, so we can see this pattern of a world that is open, that is connected, that is equitable, that is distributed, that is dynamic, that's optimistic, that's positive, that's collaborative, and that we are producing that world today. It's that's the project that we are collectively committed to. Some of us more clearly than others, some of us more consciously, but I think that, and I have to say there are people who are dead set against it. There are people who would shut down the borders, and who would close, who would build fences and who would close things off and stop things. In our research, we met an extraordinary man named Stuart Brand. And Stuart Brand said that when people believe that things are getting worse, they behave badly. They themselves, they protect themselves, they protect their family, they get defensive, they get the wagons in a circle, they close the borders, they take what they can get while they can still get it. And that is human behavior. That's human nature. And he said, on the contrary, when people understand that things are improving, they themselves take part in that. And they invest in their future. They invest in their community. They invest in their culture. They invest in their children. And they grow they grow the world instead of shrinking it. And that's the world of massive change that we discovered. And that's really the world that we're committed to. Well, if you imagine in 100 years that someone is actually seeing this, there are 2 scenarios that you could imagine. One is that there are only a few people left, and we have to begin with an apology. And the other is that we've succeeded, which I'm pretty sure will be the outcome. And we can imagine that these are our children and their children and their children. And you can see that, in fact, that understanding, that ability to see into the future, to understand generational change, and to see that, in fact, the effects of our actions have ramifications in the universe long beyond our presence, was eventually understood and embraced, and that's why we were successful.